Hey everyone, welcome back to Supply and Demand, the real cost of doing business. I'm your host, Tiffany Standard. I'm excited for this next conversation. What's in the name? Unpacking new roles in supply chain and diversity, really understanding that the face of supply chain is changing and there's a push for more diverse suppliers and employees, and partners and customers are looking for more ownership opportunities. So excited to welcome our next guest. Constance Wilson has spent her professional career helping people improve their lives through learning. She chooses to work in the education sector because education has the power to be the great equalizer. Though there are still vast inequities to be solved within the system, she is currently working at Udemy as a director of belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion, where she is seeking to really create equity in the EdTech space for members of systematically marginalized communities. Welcome, Constance, to the show.
Hello, hello, hello. Greetings, greetings. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You know, we've been leading up to this conversation for a minute, so we've been having bits and pieces of it for the last few months now. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Try to keep it to 40 minutes, but we're probably going to go over.
I'll keep it together. I promise. We're gonna
keep it short. Trying to get some tips and tricks to our folks, the supply and demand community. So I'm excited to talk to you about a couple different topics, but mainly talking about the changing of the names in the industry, talking about the industry, talking about your work at Udemy, and just you as a person. Let's talk about you as a person as well. So I want you to kind of describe your role at Udemy, but also tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to that role.
So again, hi. So my title is Global Head or Director of Belonging, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Udemy. It's called Betty. Every corporation has their different acronym, right? DEI or SJEDI, or there's a ton of them, right? But ours is Betty. And I have been working in the education and DE&I space for the better part of about 15 years now. I joined Udemy in March of 2021. So I'll start with Udemy and then I'll take it to how I got here. So at Udemy, I have a global remit, right? Responsibility for creating our overarching Betty strategy. So that's both internal and external. Internally, we're looking at policies and procedures, programs, making sure that our employees are good. And then externally, we're looking at our learning platform, social impact, vendors, stakeholders, supplier diversity programs, right? Making things like that. And so the way I got here, I have always been interested in and had a passion for diversity and equity and inclusion by way of being a part of a marginalized community, right? I have intersecting identities. I'm Black, I am a woman, right? I'm a mother, I'm married. Like I have all these identities that come together. So just by way of that, I've always had an interest in getting to know differences and being able to understand differences, not because like, oh, well, you're different from me, but just like, I want to get to know you so that we can learn out and figure out the differences about each other and then be able to work together based with those differences, right? And be able to use them as our advantage. So that's a little bit about me. I started off in marketing and slowly kind of continued to push my way both with and without the title for DE&I. And eventually I got the title. I got the job and just continued to progress until here I am at Udemy directing stuff.
I love that. And I love that title. It's definitely a lot of acronyms that you see at these different corporations as they're coming up with names. And I like Betty. I think that's a pretty cool name.
Yeah. There's a ton of them. And I think some corporations have the acronym ordered by order of appearance to them, right? So you'll see some companies have equity, diversity, and inclusion. You'll see some companies have belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, right? There's so many of them. They all come back to the same thing, but pretty much though, essentially making sure that your folks internally and your stakeholders are feeling like they're respected or feeling like they're being treated equitably and fairly, right? So it all comes down to the same thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So talk a little bit about Udemy for folks that are not familiar with that company.
Yeah. Udemy is an online learning platform. We have been around for the better part of 12 years now. We started out, about 12, 13 years almost we've been around. And it's really about helping people improve their lives through learning, right? We want to be able to democratize education, I think is the best way to put it, right? A degree right now, a bachelor's degree can cost you upwards of 6 figures. You get a piece of paper that doesn't really guarantee you a way to pay off that debt, right? You simply
you want to do something different, and then that degree really means nothing.
That's exactly right, right? So you get these things and you're just like, okay, well, I have it. So now what do I do? Now where do I go? How does this happen? You know, how can I really be able to move forward either in my career? To your point, if you're in that industry and you've decided to do something different, then you're kind of just like, oh, well, now what do I do? So Udemy really allows people the ability to be able to upskill and reskill, giving them that flexibility to be able to to develop their skills, to really be able to empower themselves to move either forward in the career that they're in or learn new skills to be able to shift and pivot. And so we offer dynamic, in-demand, actionable courses that are taught by pragmatists that include practical content, right, based on real-world skills that can be applied immediately. So it's like nothing I've ever seen. I'm here for it because anything that will reduce the amount of cost that it takes to get an education, I'm certainly here for it. So yes, that's Udemy in a nutshell.
We trying to get those loans forgiven right now. We don't need to, we don't need to add to those.
Listen, right? I mean, and that's the thing too, with Udemy courses, they're affordable, right? You have courses that can range from, $10 all the way up to $100 and maybe more, but it's not six. I don't think we have any 6-figure courses.
Because I know I've been considering my master's and I was like, I do not want to pay for it. So I started taking courses because I'm like, I'm not, you don't get discounts and scholarships to get your master's. So I've been looking into just continuing education. And sometimes I feel like life and running this business, stimulus has been a master's. I'm like, do I want to pay for a master's?
Do I want to pay for the real world experience that I'm getting just by way of being an entrepreneur? Right. Absolutely. That's the thing. And because Udemy is a global company, we have hubs, and then I'm going to stop with Udemy because I definitely want to talk about the topics, but we're a global company, right? So we have offices in Ankara, Turkey, and Denver, Colorado, and Dublin, Ireland, right? San Francisco, and Brazil. We're a global company, so it's really about making sure that there's a reflection, right? When you go onto the website and you're taking a course, you want to see yourself reflected in our instructors. And so that's something else we're working on too, which is very closely aligned to supplier diversity. So there's a segue.
Oh, I love it. So as we're seeing, there's a lot of new titles in the industry. For example, your title, like they just started adding the belonging part to titles. So describe some of the titles that you're seeing, and do they all have the same job descriptions and goals? Because I've spoken to a lot of different executives that said that their titles and duties, some that did not represent vendors and diversity when it comes to vendors. And I was actually very surprised by that because it all comes together, right? It's the future of work. It's how you're working with your team internally and externally. So kind of describe some of those titles and just those different job descriptions and goals that you're seeing, as I'm sure you're building out and expanding your network with folks that are doing similar work.
Of course. Yeah. I've seen a wealth of titles. And to your question, I'll answer the question immediately around, do they have the same job descriptions and goals? Immediately, the answer is no. It's no. So let's start with the titles and then talk about why it's a no. So the titles I've seen, Chief Equity Officer, Chief Impact Officer, Chief Diversity Officer, Global Head of DE&I, VP of Inclusion, right? There's all these different VP of Culture, right? There's all of these different titles. And the reason that they aren't the same and that you won't find them to be universally the same across the board is because there aren't any standardizations in this industry. D&I, while it's been around for a very long time, there still hasn't been any efforts to really standardize it, right? So across the board, this is what it looks like. So for finance, for example, right? With finance, you've got the numbers, it all makes sense. You can do finance no matter what industry it is pretty much boils down to the same thing. With DE&I, while it's industry agnostic, it's still, there's no standardizations, right? So if I'm doing it this way in tech, it might look different in education, right? It shouldn't. It should really be all the same, but it's not. And so the ISO, International Organization for Standardization, is actually working on fixing that. They came up with a new standard specifically for DE&I to rectify that, so that there is more standardization, so that when you're doing things like benchmarking or trying to understand the data and best practices, you actually have something that's concrete that you can build upon, as opposed to, oh, well, this company does this, so I'm going to go after that. Or that company does it this way, so I want to model that. Because unless you're actually physically working for that company and you can understand what they're doing from the inside, you can't really say whether their best practice is a true best practice or whether that will work for your company and your industry. Right. So it's kind of like everyone's working in silos, trying to do the best that they can for their company without that standardization. So I think that's really going to be a game changer. But that's
Yeah.
in short, that's the no. Why
No,
it's not.
that's really important because, as I'm working across different organizations and looking at, if they have supply diversity programs or thinking about it, overall trying to spend better, overall trying to hire better.
Yeah.
Everybody has categorized what small business mean. Everybody has categorized what diversity means when it comes to certifications. Do they require it? Do they not require it? And even that can go back and forth. Like, okay, everybody that's non-white, but then if they're LGBTQ owned business, but then they're white owned, that's quote unquote considered diverse, but then quote unquote is not.
Quote unquote, it's not. Touche. No, you're right. And I think the other part of it, Tiffany, is really that for a long time, DE&I has been thought of as a subset of like human resources, right? So there's already a disconnect in terms of supplier diversity. So HR and human resources and DEI are certainly complementary, right? There are certainly things that will allow for checks and balances, but when you're talking about the HR function, HR and procurement typically do not sit together at all.
Not even close.
Not even close. And so if you're talking about someone with a remit underneath the HR division that's supposed to be looking after, diversity, equity, and inclusion, supplier diversity almost becomes something separate, like a finance function or sometimes IT, right? So like a finance IT function, and it's not being included in the remit of the person that's responsible for making sure all of these things are working collectively. So unless you have a person that's understanding of, okay, well, this actually is, right, that's working cross-functionally, is able to understand, like, yes, I do need to be looking after this as well, then it's lost. Right. So yeah, we don't want it.
No, you don't want it lost because it's been lost, right?
It's been lost.
People are trying to figure it out, but it's kind of growing across different industries. So that's interesting.
That's right.
To that point. So what are some of the challenges industry leaders are running into to make their businesses more inclusive? What are you seeing in your current role? What are you seeing in past role, or just like your network of like, what are the challenges? Besides, in addition to that, just adding on to, it's not in the right category, not under the right people. So
right. I think there's a few things, Tiffany. One of those things is really knowledge, right? Some business leaders just have no idea how to make their businesses more inclusive because they've never had to, right? So this is new territory for them. So I find that most are concerned with doing the wrong thing, right? Well, I want to do something, I want to do it right, but I don't want to be called, insert discriminatory or disrespectful term here, racist, sexist, whatever that looks like. I don't want to be affiliated with that, so I'm just not going to do anything because I'm scared.
You won't even start.
Exactly. I'm not going to start. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to continue to move along as I have been. Another part is apathy. Really, right? Some leaders talk about inclusivity and diversifying their business, but their actions are actually indicative of the contrary, right? There's this mentality of, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I've been doing this for a long time and I've been able to, my bottom line is looking good. My finances are good, so there's not a concern for me. So there's no motivation to me for some companies to be able to address then those DE&I concerns or those DE&I issues, especially around supplier diversity. And I think the last part of that is really around perception. There are leaders that don't perceive DE&I supplier diversity as a business imperative, right? It's still being viewed as a nice to have. So you have some leaders that are like, financiers are getting a little bit rocky. We need to make some changes. DE&I's got to go. It's not revenue bearing. Anything related to it has absolutely got to go. It's the first thing to be cut. And so when you look at these three things, knowledge, apathy, perception, these are all things that can be changed, right? It takes business leaders it takes them being intentional about their efforts and understanding the value of having things like a supplier diversity program and the value of having DE&I initiatives and efforts and things like that to be able to make a change, because if not, they will proceed with status quo until they're mandated or forced, right, to be able to make a difference.
Yeah, so what's a good starting point? So obviously, brain-wise, being intentional, right? Your own thoughts of like, I'm going to intentionally do this across the company. It, beyond, a nice to have, beyond social good, which I'm trying to get it out of social good. For me, it's always just about picking the best companies and making sure that includes people of color and women, right? You're just looking across the board. Like, you're looking at the end of the day to buy from the best companies, and you're excluding, great companies just because of lack of knowledge and network and whatever else you want to call it, right? So as a company, what would you say, or what you're doing as the first step to even, you got the attention now, you're intentional about your goals. So what are the next steps for a company to just start somewhere? Because like you said, and I speak to a lot, oh, we're still figuring it out. And I'm like, just do something.
It's the figure it out part. So my advice to companies that are looking to be able to do something would be to do something, starting with a few things, right? The first one would be to speak to a consultant, right? Set some money aside in the budget to have someone that specializes. If you're not able to hire on a full-time staff, dedicated and full-time staff and team, preferably, and team, because this is not a one-person job. This truly takes a village, right? So it takes more than one person to be able to sustain the work. But having someone externally, a consultant, come through and just do an assessment. Do an org-wide assessment of everything you have going, from, your policies, your procedures, your programs, your benefits, really just a fine-tooth comb through everything that you have going on, and allow that consultant to really be able to help you understand where you can do better. So help you understand where you can do better and provide you with maybe preferably an action plan to be able to get those things together, right? Because then at least you have a starting point. And once you have a starting point, then the secondary step would be to hire an internal person, right? A full-time staff dedicated to it. If you don't have someone already, to have someone go through and really execute on that action plan and then reiterate, right? So you execute on the action plan that's been established by the consultants, and then you figure out how to be able to move forward with that action plan, right? So it's not just like okay, one and done. It's a wash, rinse, repeat, right? So going back and continually iterating on the things that you have going on your action plan. Is this working for my employees present day? If you got an action plan that was put together 5 years ago, it might not be applicable to what we have going on now, right? So continuing to look at it, constantly assessing, constantly analyzing, looking at your demographic data, looking at your stakeholder population. Is your workforce homogenous? Are your suppliers homogenous, right? And if so, we need to change that, right? So it's easier said than done, because I've been doing this for so long, but it does, it takes some work, and it does take folks to be able to be willing to acknowledge the fact that they don't have it all together, or they don't know something, right? Yeah. There's a fear of incompetence that has set it in for, I think there was a study done that said, like, by the age of 12, there's a fear of incompetence that sets in, and folks are just, if you hear a kid, teenagers sound like an old, right? You hear like people of the younger generations that'll say, well, I know everything. It's not that they do, it's that they're afraid of saying that they don't know something, because there's vulnerability that comes with that. My goodness, well, someone might think I'm incompetent if I say I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. But there's also strength in saying, I don't know, and this is why I'm going to seek help, right? So there's also a reframing that needs to happen that some business leaders just aren't willing to do.
Yeah. You said a lot, but I'm gonna bring it back to 2 points that I've been seeing missing across companies: budget, team.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing, putting actual money towards it, right? Yes. And us being in this field of procurement and supply chain, it's like the budget doesn't just have to come from one place. When it comes to, it can come from sales, it can come from marketing, it can come from HR, because those suppliers are working with the employees that HR person is hiring. Absolutely. And yes. It can come from finance and IT. It can come from multiple budgets to say, hey, we're trying to find the best companies. 1, hey, we're trying to diversify who we're spending with, because our customers and our employees are diverse. And then 3, we're trying to make sure that we are improving profit margins and saving time and money on who we're purchasing from. So then you're going through that list and you're like, okay, we're trying to choose the best company for this IT project, and it happens to be a woman-owned company. Boom, we're checking multiple boxes, right? So we're seeing the budget come from, at least in your conversations with people, because that's what's missing. I'm like, hey, this is for everything. It's great marketing, it's great IT, it's great finance. It's like you can take 10% from each, 5% if you want to start there. And then the second part is the team part. You see that one person trying to do it all, trying to connect with a big company trying to get on people's calendar just to do their one job. And that becomes such a difficult task for them. And then like, okay, what you expect them to do when they're the one diversity person throughout the entire organization?
Yeah. A couple of things. So in terms of where does budget come from, that goes back to, I've seen that benefit really from having someone internally on the team, a director, a VP, some type of executive that's able to speak cross-functionally to all teams and have all teams understand the value of, right? When you're speaking with a finance leader, when you're speaking with a sales leader, if you're not able to speak their language, because there is for sure a language that needs to be spoken with these different teams, you have to be able to speak their language, and then you have to ensure that everyone is on the page with the value in it. If I, as an org leader, don't see value in something that you're talking to me about, there is no way I am letting go of any part of my purse strings to be able to give you money for something that I don't believe in or something that I don't value. It's not going to happen, right? So I think a part of that too is getting a champion. So starting with the top down, starting with the CEO, making sure that there's alignment there. Listen, CEO, this is something that will be helpful for our
listen, CEO. That's how you want to like
CEO, right? I'm like, let's sit down. Like, come on, friend. Let's sit down and have a one-on-one conversation so that you're understanding so that person can champion the efforts, right? Because there's also a difference. I found that people that are typically within the DE&I function don't have it's more of an influencer role outside of that DE&I function, right? So I can't go to the sales leader and say, hey, sales leader, I need you to give me 5% of your budget. They're like, what? Constance, have a seat. Absolutely not. No. But if the CEO is going to the sales leader or the finance leader or the engineering leader or the whomever leader and saying, you need to give 5% of your budget to DE&I efforts because that's what we need to do as a company. That's the direction we're moving in. It has a different ring to it, right? And so there's that. And then also when you're talking about having one person do this job, it is not sustainable for one person to do anything. I don't care what it is. It's just not.
Regardless of the title.
Right. It's just not. It's not sustainable at all. And so what I have found in some of the companies is that they are asking for, for example, their employee resource groups. So you'll see a lot of the employee resource groups doing this work. Well, employee resource groups in most cases and scenarios are volunteer, right? So they're doing 100% of their 9 to 5, I'll call it, but whatever it is, right? Their actual job, they're doing that 100%. And then now they're adding an additional 10, 20, sometimes more % of their workload or of their day, their capacity dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, which is also not sustainable, especially given the pandemic, especially given personal lives and obligations. Like it's too much. And then folks just like, not it, right. Not going to do it.
That's a lot of volunteer time.
Exactly. And so it's truly not sustainable. Budget is massive. It has to be able to come from the top down that this is the direction that we're moving in. Ideally, the CEO would have a dedicated budget specifically for DE&I efforts, the same way that you would marketing, the same way that you would sales, right? Everyone has their own individual budgets. And if DE&I as being seen as a business imperative and a business initiative, then you should also have a budget, preferably in the 6 figures, to be able to sustain the work, right? Instead of just, a $500 budget that will allow me to maybe buy some supplies, maybe.
You go to a conference. That's what you get to do. You'll be able to go to
one person at the
conference and meet some folks. And
that's right. That's right. The budget does, and I was being facetious with 6 figures, but the budget does need to be substantial enough to be able to sustain the work that's being done. Otherwise, once the budget is gone, the efforts will likely be gone. The person that's leading the work internally will likely be burned out. They will likely leave the company. The employee resource groups are not going to do the work because it is not their actual jobs, and they have to get their paycheck to be able to do their jobs and sustain their own lives. And so it's definitely a cycle that needs to be broken, but budget and team are 2 of the primary factors, to your point, that really need to be focused on.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And slowly but surely, I'm seeing those teams grow, but it's still around 2 or 3 people. So we got to work on whether it's taking from other groups and adding them to help, or even bringing in outside help. But that's that is what's missing as well, because you just get burnt out too quickly when you're trying to
It's definitely a burnout. Another thing that I've seen, something that I've seen it in the industry, is where companies are allowing employee resource groups and employee resource groups members to be able to allocate a portion of their actual, their job duties or their job times dedicated to employee resource groups or dedicated to diversity initiatives, right? So now instead of me doing 100% of my job and then additional 20%, now it's 80% of my job is dedicated to accounting, and the last 10 to 20%, of my job is dedicated to diversity initiatives or to, being able to sustain the work and move the work forward. So it's another option. I know that some companies are smaller companies, right? You may not have the resources to hire and dedicate a full-time staff to do the work, which is likely telling, right? That can paint a picture. So you got to be careful as well. But there is also a way to be able to sustain the work if you do it the right way.
No, I've seen that. One of our investors/partners, a large corporation, has this monthly group where the CEO actually attends each month, I was very surprised by that. And it's different parts of the company that's focusing on their racial equity initiative, which includes funding not only companies like myself, but funding Black operators, like becoming LPs in Black funds. And then internally, what they're doing with the employees, suppliers, and it's different parts of the team that meet. And then they hired an outside person to kind of run it as well. And it includes all of like the top executives. Like, can we duplicate this? Can y'all make a little documentary on what y'all doing?
That's practice for sure. Yeah, that sounds very similar to, so at Udemy, we have our Global Betty Council. Right. So the Global Betty Council is representative of all of our orgs. We have marketing. Our SVP of finance was actually on our council, right? Our SVP of marketing as well. But it's a cross-functional representation of members that are coming together to really sit down and talk about our Betty initiatives. So in addition to that cross-functionality, we also have geographic representation, right? From all of our regions I mentioned earlier, like Turkey and Ireland, right? From all those regions to ensure that we have representation from both ends, both from a geographical standpoint, as well as an org standpoint. And what that does, our CEO, Greg Kokari, is also the executive sponsor for our council, right? So we sit down. One of the first things that we did as a council was to come together and sit down and, okay, everyone write down from your lane, what are you seeing from a Betty perspective? What is working well? What is not working well? Let me get that for each one of the orgs. And then we came out of that and we created an action plan. Okay, now that we've got it, we're going to start working on this action plan and making sure that we are able to sustain this work and move it forward and not just say, okay, we met and now we're done. Like, no, that's not.
We had this plan, but we haven't started it yet.
But we're not going to do anything about it. Exactly. Right. Exactly. So yeah, that's having a council, having a dedicated team is crucial. It's crucial for being able to push this work forward.
No, I love that. As I'm thinking of challenges on the outside of the company looking in, right? What are some of the challenges that suppliers are running into to work with these different companies? So as we're thinking of internally, we talked about it before, and I'm gonna say it I'm saying on the call, like the system is designed to work the way it's supposed to. So it's really hard to get in. And I always compare supply chain to HR because it's no difference when you're hiring and, the difficulties to get into certain companies and maintain and stay. And no different than getting into a company supply chain and obtaining and maintaining contracts, right? So, unfortunately, it's always been boys club and who do you know? How did you get your first pilot? How did you get your first POC, proof of concept, all of those things. And now it's like, okay, do I need to know someone to get into, this company? Do I need to, get into a supplier diversity program? So like, what are some of the challenges that you are seeing that these suppliers are running into?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the system, it is large and all encompassing, right? For sure. So the system is definitely a part of the problem. And when I say the system, is specifically, right, the processes that are put in place to prevent small business owners and to prevent those from marginalized communities to actually having the opportunity in this space to be able to move forward and compete with a company like, not going to name any names, but a big company, I'll just say. I'll just say a big company, right? So the processes that are put in place to be able to bring awareness to help small minority. I hate saying, I really truly detest saying the word minority.
I do too.
I am saying it only because it is a government term, and that's
where I was at Black Tech Week last week, and I forgot who said it. It was like, we're not going to say minority because we ain't minor or something like that. I was like, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What did
Language,
you say underrepresented? We're gonna say diverse. We're changing these titles. Like
we're changing it because words truly do matter. There is
it's
nothing minor about me. There is nothing minor about these suppliers. So instead, what we're going to say is marginalized. There we go.
Okay.
I don't worry about that.
Right.
Right. So bring awareness to small, marginalized, women-owned, veteran-owned, right? These enterprises. And you to get that awareness, first you have to certify, right? We were talking about that. You have to have the certification to designate yourself and say, yes, I am a part of a marginalized community. That can take up to, what is it, like three months or something like that to get
that organization. And then if they're backed up, it takes even longer.
Right. And we're talking about fees as well. There are fees required to be able to fire and to be able to move forward, right? That are required. And then it also varies by state. So automatically you're kind of starting behind the ball, right? On where you need to go. And so, okay, you get the certification, you've done the fees, you're registered, you're all good to go. And then now, to your point, depending on your business, you're competing with large corporations. How are you able to, right, to be able to get yourself out there? Most small businesses don't have money for resources like to do things like marketing or, put a commercial on the Super Bowl or, advertising and do all of that, right? Most small companies don't have the resources or the finances to be able to sustain that. And so when you talk about these challenges, it's massive to be a supplier and be able to say, okay, well, yes, look at me. I have the same qualifications and I can get you whatever you're looking for at a cheaper rate, whatever that is, right? But I can't even get myself seen. Yeah. Right. And so to your point, it's really around having companies really be able to understand how to be intentional and seek out, right? Having a supplier diversity program, having something that will allow any and everyone to know what you're looking for so that they can bid along with the other big companies that are bidding for it, right? And then from there, be able to say, yes, in addition to all the greatness I have going on with my company, I am also I'm coming from, different marginalized communities. And so let's be able to move forward and get this work done. But it takes that intentional effort to be able to make that happen.
No, it does. And I think what are your recommendations for suppliers to just, as people are talking about it, right? For however long it will be the topic. We're trying to keep it going, but keep it going. And I think, before I go there, even when people put out the amount of time that they're going to do it for, you know what I mean? For example, some of the racial equity initiatives that came out, they're like, okay, until 2023, we're going to this money, or it's 2024. So before I even get back to the suppliers, let's talk about that part. Should it be a deadline of a year, or should you say going forward, this is what we're going to do? Because there's been so much of like, this is stopping 2024, 2025. We're going to focus on, Black community, nonprofits, and we're going to, all these different things. I'm like, why is there a year? Because then it's like a finish line, but it's never finished.
It's never finished. And so yes and no. What I've seen from my perspective is the timeline that says by X date, we're going to be here. And then once we're here, we're going to continue to move forward. So I've seen companies giving themselves, 5 years, 10 years, 20. I'm like, 20, yeah, that's excessive. Like, stop. Just come on, like, stop. It wouldn't take you 20 years to find that $1 million. You know what I mean? Like, stop it. You can, you don't need 20 years.
Effort, little 1%.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. No, you don't need 20 years for that. So I have seen that, and where companies are just setting themselves for like, by this date is when we plan to have X, Y, and Z done. So if they say by this date we plan to have X, Y, and Z done, and then that date comes and there's nothing done, there's no accountability, there's nothing to show for, that's a problem. That's performative, right? But when you have companies that are constantly coming back and saying, yes, on our journey to get to 2025, to your point, present day, we've done X, we've done Y, we've done Z. Here is the data that shows it. Here's our ESG report that proves it, right? Being able to be transparent with the public so that the public is understanding and aware of what's happening, as opposed to 2025 gets here and you're like, nah, sorry.
Like, we tried.
That's right.
We put out some stuff.
We meant to say 2030, not 2025. 2030. 5
more years to figure this out. Like, what's happening? It happens so often, but some put like deadlines, like we're going to do this for the next 5 years, or it
Right.
wasn't like we're going to achieve this. It was just like, okay, over the next 5 years, our plan is. I'm like, okay, what happens after that 5 years?
Exactly. And that's the part that's missing from these conversations, right? So when we're actually working on our inaugural Betty plan, which will detail our 5 year, probably not 5 year, because this is our first one. It'll probably be like a year first, then 3 years, then 5 years. But essentially the goal is to let our stakeholders know what's happening, how we're progressing. So there will be updates, right, that are happening on our website so people can go and check out and see what we're doing. I will be, putting out blog posts and presenting on webinars to keep people posted and informed. So I'm not here for the performative. Either we're going to do the work or we're not. But if we're not, that there's consequences for actions, right? Yeah. And I don't want anyone, looking at me sideways like, well, Constance, you said back in January that you were going to have an update come September, and I haven't seen an update. Like, what's going on? Right. You won't get that from me. There will be updates.
Got it. No, I love that. And I know your plan is like internal, externally, but are you being an education company, are you educating folks as far as like walking people throughout your journey and putting it on video as like a learning skill, or is that part of like the action just because of what you do?
Yeah. So there are instructors for sure that are on the platform that kind of go and speak about diversity, that speak about inclusion, that talk about the differences between unconscious bias and things like that, right? So there are definitely instructors that do that. What my team is working on is being able to provide some additional free resources for customers that will allow them to go on their own journeys. To your point, maybe I've never heard of maybe I've never heard of the word anti-racism. I don't know what that means, right? So, right. I mean, if you, depending on where you live, you never know. I'm just saying, you got to, right? We don't want to make assumptions.
Sure.
If there's someone
in the metaverse, you haven't heard it. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Maybe you live somewhere else. Go ahead.
You might live somewhere else. If there's someone that says, well, I hear the term white privilege, I don't know what that means, right? There are new terms and new phrases within the DE&I space that are coming every day. Intersectionality, that's an old term, but still, right? There are terms that folks might not be familiar with. So allowing them to have the resources on the platform that will enable them and empower them to be able to move forward in their own journeys. Just a little bit of education, right? Sometimes it takes learning and unlearning, right? I will say one of the goals that we speak about very often at Udemy, the golden rule was treat people the way that they want to be treated, right? Or actually, no, treat people the way you want to be treated. That was the golden rule. You treat people the way that you want to be treated, which actually takes out the person's feelings, right? You're not concerned with how they want to be treated. Instead, you're treating them the way that you would want to be treated, which is centering yourself. That's a problem. We're not supposed to center ourselves. You're supposed to be centering that person and asking them how they want to be treated, asking them how they feel. So there are so many differences and there's so much education that needs to happen. We're going to make it happen so that folks are able to do that, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. So going back to the supplier side, as we're talking about these plans and companies being more intentional and hopefully going past the 3 to 5, 20 years, whatever their plan is, how does, a supplier take advantage of what's happening for, hopefully, like I said, the conversation continues, right? And it grows from there. But how can companies, suppliers take advantage of the conversations now to get into someone's supply chain, such as Udemy?
Yeah, I think before those conversations can even happen, I think companies, Udemy included, needs to come up with things and ways to making sure that those conversations can even happen. Right? Because there's still an understanding of, well, where are these suppliers? I want to work with them. I want to be able to find them. Where are the whole infamous, well, where are they? I don't know where to find, right? So I think before we even get to that.
I just came back from Black Tech Week. It was about 1,000, but go ahead. Go ahead.
There are places, right? But I think before we even get to the parts around the conversations, there need to be internal efforts to making sure that these conversations can happen. So you have a supplier diversity program, amazing. Without a policy or something like that to actually enforce to making sure that these things are happening, it could be perceived as performative, right? So if you have a supplier diversity program, but without any policies or without any accountability and expectations that your workers and your procurement team is actually being able to move forward and sustain it, then what are we doing, right? We're kind of doing it for nothing. And the other part is the transparency of it. We were speaking about earlier, right? Some of these suppliers, they're small businesses. They don't have the resources to be able to compete with the bigger companies, not naming names, right? And so without even, I think a start of it is also too knowing, right? Being aware of, you mentioned Udemy. So, okay, well, what is Udemy, right? What are we procuring? What are we looking for? What are we doing? So without even knowing that information, it's difficult to be able to successfully compete, right? With the bigger companies, if you're not even aware of what's going on. And I think another part of it is that not all companies are even tracking the diversity of their suppliers.
Right.
So it's back to that, it's not broken, don't fix it mentality, where it's like, well, I'm not tracking it because there hasn't been a mandate. No one's asking me to. I'm not accountable for this.
Right.
So I'm just not.
Right.
There's a lack of understanding to address and improve. And so it just doesn't happen. And I think another part of it too is making sure, in addition to, right, we talked about the policies, we talked about being transparent with suppliers so that they're able to understand what's needed. But I think the other thing too is making sure that the supplier diversity program is actually fully integrated with the procurement team, right? Making sure that, whenever any order is placed, that we're actually considering not the norm, not, my cousin's shop that I knew from whatever. We're not doing that, right? Look at your diversity, look at your supplier pool and be able to choose accordingly based on the qualifications, right? As opposed to, well, I'm just going to do this because I know this person. And I think another thing for that is automation. Automation can definitely help tremendously with being able to track those efforts, making sure that you're actually looking at the diversity of your suppliers and making sure that you're giving everyone that equitable chance to be able to come in and fill the needs that you're procuring. Right. And so that was a mouthful, but yes, all the things.
That's music to my ears on the automation side of what we do at Stimulus, because it's all about just finding great companies.
That's right.
I'm saying it, but I normally try not to say it publicly. But when it comes to supply diversity programs that's separate from procurement and where they're spending regularly, it's literally like a form of segregation, honestly. Because we only have the people of color in this database and you have everybody else over here. How are you truly looking across the board of just finding great companies when you're looking to make a purchase, right? And looking at a company that can grow into your supply chain, even if they got a smaller company, they talk about tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 are normally the bigger company that get the contract, and then tier 2 are normally the smaller businesses that are working alongside the company. So it's like, if everybody's separate, when you're thinking of making a purchase and those databases are completely separate from each other, how are you actually looking at real companies? And not just because they're Black, but they're just companies just across the board.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
There are $50 billion people of color owned, women owned companies that you're missing because you already categorized them somewhere else. So I always look at that and I'm just like, it is, you're separating basically kind of by color and size. Honestly.
Yes, exactly. And I know we touched on this before, but you made that correlation around HR with supplier diversity, right? And what's going on. But similarly, right? I have a very big problem with the term diversity recruiting, right? It sounds very token to me. It makes me angry. That's not what we're doing. We are not seeking out someone to hire someone based on their skin color, based on their identities. We are seeking to hire someone because they are qualified for the job. So again, it's about that balancing, right? We are looking to balance our workforce so it's not so homogenous. So it's not just an all boys club, as you were mentioning earlier, right? We're looking to balance it out. And so it's the same thing with supplier diversities. And to your point, you're right. If you have this population over here, those are something that we're going to peek into whenever we feel like, we need to check a box. Then we'll grab a token and then we'll bring it back this way. Like, no, thank you. No, thank you. That's actually not what I want to do.
You talked about the hiring. What was the name of what you're calling it versus diversity recruiting?
Balanced recruiting. Yes. Balanced recruiting. We, like we said, words truly matter as the other thing another part of that, and I'm going to jump back to supplier diversity, is like diverse candidate. I'm not a diverse candidate. Don't call me that. Stop. Like, just full stop. Don't say it, right? Because to me, it rings very synonymous with token, right? I don't want to know, okay, well, you hired me because I'm a Black woman. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and put my resignation in. We're not going to do this thing. Like, you should hire me because I am qualified to do the job based on my credentials, not my identity. I'm going to step down from that soapbox because you said we were going to try to keep this on track.
No, but it's the same thing when it comes to supplier diversity.
Yes.
As much as I've been a part of these programs, I've helped with these programs. It's the same thing when it comes to companies. I can speak to a lot of companies that say, I don't want to get a certification because I'm categorized here versus just hiring my company for the reasons that I am qualified. You looked at my data, you looked at my information, and I won this contract fair and square, not because you tried to give me 5% of it as a checkbox for diversity. So it's really a catch-22. It's like, you need balanced recruiting, but at the same time, it's like, how do you just look at great candidates and pick a great candidate and you happen to be a Black woman? Same thing on the supplier diversity side. You're picking a great company, and I'm not necessarily in the supplier diversity program, but you know that you're picking me and I'm checking the box and I'm doing great, and I happen to be a woman and a Black woman. Like it's like, that is needed to make it more intentional, because friends and folks and relationships get the positions and the contracts, and so you have to be intentional. But for me as a person, it also puts me in a box where I get upset.
Yes.
So I don't know what that balance is, because they need to intentionally do something, but then I'm in this box that I'm sitting in this separate database, and I'm like, I guess you're going to call me one day.
Right. And that's the part that's a sign of the times, right? That's a sign of the times and where we are. So things like from the HR perspective, like the affirmative action programs and things like that, there are systems and things that are put in place to making sure that there is more visibility to folks from marginalized communities, from suppliers from marginalized communities, right? To be able to ultimately balance out what we have going. We didn't get here to where we are overnight. We are not going to solve where we are right now overnight. It will take time. And unfortunately, my strategy is more like kick the door open. I don't want to hold the door. I don't want to put a Band-Aid on the door. I want to kick it open, completely open, and start from scratch.
Yeah, pretty much. I would love to start from scratch, but then sometimes when I think when people say start from scratch, then it's going to take longer because we started from scratch.
Right, because we started from scratch.
I'm sitting there like, damn, we should have just kept what we were doing at least. You know what I mean? You starting over, it's like, it's over. Right. 5 years for you to figure it out, and that's not good either. We got to keep with the time, right?
Touche. Yes, we do, Tiffany. Yes, we do.
So I think I keep going back and forth with suppliers on that, of like, should you get certification? Should you not? Should you go after this program? But I also say, at the end of the day, take advantage of what's happening right now.
That's right.
Intention, hopefully good intentions from these companies.
Yes.
And I have worked with some that are amazing, that are really doing the work and care about who they're working with and who they're purchasing from, and understanding that information and tracking that information, whether it's internally with employees or externally with suppliers. So I say, as these times are happening and these conversations are happening, like, take advantage of it, be ready, go after it, build those relationships, network, all of that. Because, sometimes it's that saying of, it doesn't matter how you get in there, just get in there and stay there thing, right? So it's that too, right? It doesn't matter how you get there. People are talking about, like, when you get guilt money from like investors, I'm like, I just need their money. I don't care where it's coming from. Like, we don't got time to think about all the extra stuff. Like, it's what I do with the money. It's what you do once you get in there, and then you bring someone else in, and you help them add to their supply chain. It's like, just get there and stay there and grow there, and making sure that you're helping others do the same.
That's right. I think that took me back a little bit, because I think about like the ancestors, right? And I think about the people that came before us and the people that came before them, and the things that they had to go through to get us to the point where we're sitting on this webinar. You were owning your own company. You were running things. I'm a director in corporate America. Like, right? That took some intentional effort from a lot of folks for a long time for us to be able to sit where we are right now. And so, to your point, yes, it is about the future generations, right? And setting up things and establishing things now, so that when they get their turn to be able to go to the door's already open. They don't have to kick it. They don't have to burn it. They can just walk through, right? Based on what we've done right now, present day.
Yeah. No, that's true. No, I get that. So we talked a lot about what you're working on at Udemy. What does the next 12 months look like for you at Udemy? What is Udemy kind of putting out there and also kind of like the work you're doing with your team.
Yeah, so I do have a team. Shout out to Jeff and Taylor and Brenna. Yes, I do have a team. And thankfully with Udemy, what I really do like about this company is that it's not just me, right? It's not just a one-person show. There are truly a wealth of people working on Betty efforts, both with and without the title. So I mentioned my team. I have a team of 3 plus myself. That's 4. There we go. Do the math. Right? And it's a lot more than I've seen at some companies, right? Especially companies of our size. So I'm grateful for that. But we have our employee resource groups. We spoke about the Betty Council earlier. We have a culture crew, right? A committee that's actually dedicated to like events and planning and making sure that culture stays the way it is. And then we also have a host of folks, both with and without the titles, that are keeping us accountable for all the efforts that we have going on, right? For some of the things that we spoke about. And so we are also working from the inside out with Betty efforts. I think we were discussing, right, like the intentional focus on employees and then as well as our stakeholders. And so we call them Udemates, the employees. Hey, y'all.
Udemates?
Udemates. Yep. Udemates. That's right. Right. Udemates. But it's really important for Udemates to be able to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Right. So if we give a program on, the effects of racism in education, and we're not explaining why that matters and why it's relevant to Udemy and our mission and what we're doing, then it's like one of those one-time check the box trainings that nobody ever revisits, nobody ever goes back to, and they don't fully understand why it was being done. Right. So it's really important to articulate that to our internal staff around what we're doing and why we're doing it. But it's also really important to understand the data behind our efforts so that we can set benchmarks and then be able to improve upon it moving forward. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was about hiring an external consultant. And so we're actually partnering with Canaries, who is a tech firm that's using data.
Yeah, I know them well.
Yeah, yes. Well, there you go. Yeah. For those that don't know, I'm excited too. For those that don't know, Canaries is a tech firm that really uses a data-driven approach to be able to create long-term systemic change around DE&I. They're fantastic. We've been working with them to be able to get it done. But that's the part when I was referring to like going through your system with a fine-tooth comb, right? Yes, I've been doing this work for a long time. It would take me an even longer time to go through each one of our systems and policies to be able to discover what's going on. The work would never be done, right? But hiring a third party to help us to do that is going to be top notch. And so they're going to conduct an organizational systems audit to help us bring visibility to potential issues that we have going on so that we can do things like set up our strategic plan, our 3-year plan, our 1-year plan to be able to talk to folks around what we're doing and being okay with and being transparent with the fact that we're not where we want to be, right? We're not where we want to be. And that's okay. What's not okay though, if we just sit with that, right? That would not be okay. It is okay to understand it and then be able to move forward. And that's where we are right now, trying to understand our data so that we can make intentional efforts to be able to move forward and action based on what we find.
Yeah, that vulnerability across the board is what's missing. I feel like just saying that you don't know, and it's okay that you don't know. I rather only say that they don't know versus silently know that they don't know and just sit there and not actually do anything and care about what's happening, whether it's with your suppliers or even internally with your employees, right? So I think that information and you, hopefully Udemy being that leader in that, or at least a part of that group of saying, we don't know, and we're trying and we're making these partnerships and innovating with these amazing companies that can help. And then now we're going to figure it out and try to actually grow and move forward from there.
And get better. Yes, it's all about progress, right? Like I said, for the companies that are just like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. Don't do that. That's a sad choice, right? Like, you've got to do something. You've got to make some type of an effort to be able to move yourself forward and progress. Like that's how it works, right? You have to
business in general.
That's business in general. Exactly right. You've got to pivot and make changes, right? To be able to accommodate for whatever's happening around you. And so that's what we're doing. That's the importance of it, being able to pivot and action based on what's happening around us. And what's happening around us is not okay, right? Our society there's a lot that's going on right now in our society and globally, right? There are so many things that are happening. I'm not comfortable with just sitting and pretending that we don't see the things that are happening in our world. Not going to happen.
No, I agree. So, and companies are now being forced to talk about it. What's happening.
That's right.
Just ignore. It's important to go to a company that you feel like you can, grow with and they care about what's happening around, right? as they call it, like being a responsible corporate citizen, as they say.
That's right. That's right. Or like certified B corporations, right? That are coming up now. That's a new certification that's happening. More and more employees want to know that a company that they're working for is aligned with not only their professional, their professional goals, but their personal values. If you can't stand with me as a Black woman and understand the struggles that I go through as a Black woman, then I likely don't need to work for your company, because that's going to be a conflict immediately, right? No, that's not a good idea.
Especially as more things come out the news, and if I need like a day off and you don't understand why, we got to go. We got to go.
Right?
And I love what I started to see a lot of that over the last couple of years. Like, you need a mental health day? Yes, we do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's good to say that. And I say that to my team, and I say that across the board of like, if we need a day, we need a day. Because I know I need a day. And I'm starting to see companies say that to their employees, like, take that mental health day as you need it.
It's important. It's crucial to understand. Like, during the pandemic, I was working a full-time job. I was working on 2 master's degrees, and I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old at home with me, both like physically right here. And let me tell you something. Nope. Wow. There were many days now, and I know that I'm not the only one. I know that there are caretakers and people out there even that are not caretakers that were going through it. Yeah. Personally, it was a struggle, and I needed a lot of mental days just to sustain my sanity. Right? Yeah. There was so much that was going on, and so yes, being able to say, look, I'm not feeling it today, or I just saw something in the news and that's not sitting well with my spirit. I just need to be able to, sit down for a minute and like not be on this Zoom call and pretend that I'm okay while you ask me about how my weekend was, as if you didn't just see the murder on demand that happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Friend.
I love the way you say friend. Like you talk CEO friend. Like you're just gonna go to the CEO of the company. Hey, look, can we talk? Like, sure. Like, maybe. Sometimes that happens, but all the time. All right, we are going to close out because we can talk for an hour, and I know people are just going to continue to watch us talk for an hour. So we are going to close out. Thank you for watching Supply and Demand, the Real Cost of Doing Business. This conversation was focused on what's in a name, unpacking new roles in supply chain and diversity. Thank you to my guest, Constance Wilson. She is at Udemy as a director of belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you all.